about as good as I'm going to get.
There you go. From here on in, it's all downhill for both of us. That's what it is. Hey, welcome to the pond this afternoon, folks. I got John Anderson with you here. As I said, the guy's a world-renowned musky angler. He lives, sleeps, like the guy has nightmares about muskies and everything else. So it's one of those things. But you don't realize he's going to go over with you. You don't realize what you have right on your doorstep here. You're possibly, there's the exotic places, but there's musky fishing here, like beyond your dreams. And he's going to go over with you and explain a bunch of it to you.
Yeah. Why Ottawa is the greatest city in the world to be a musky angler. It's true.
You gonna give them up any of the spots? No. Eh?
No, we don't give away spots. We just
something we never do. Anyways, John Anderson, folks.
Thanks everybody for being here. What a great turnout. Thanks, Big Jim. Want to say a special thanks to Big Jim. If you look at the fishing section here today, if you've been coming to the outdoor shows for years and years, fishing got smaller and smaller and smaller and pushed aside. And this is like a comeback year, and Big Jim's one of the person who leads the charge on that. So nice to have a fishing section, and I hope they're noticing how many people are using it. We're going to talk about why this is true today. It's not just a homer telling you that he's proud of his home waters. It absolutely is true. It's what the Americans think, it's what we think. Thanks to Scott Sprague and BOS Promotions for putting this on. Fishing is now, my information is out of date, it's over a $10 billion industry. If you own a boat, odds are you're fishing in it. And so we matter. Thanks to Shimano, Loomis, Power Pro, and Jackal, to Muskies Canada. I'm going to talk about them and what an incredible job they do in our region, and Andre Lalonde Marine and Crestliner. A muskie is the biggest, baddest, fastest swimming fish in freshwater in North America. Burst speeds over 50 kilometers an hour. There's nothing that a muskie can't chase down. Has more ego and attitude than any fish that swims. It's the apex predator in the water. It owns the water, and it knows it, and it acts like it owns the water as well. And this is the golden age of muskie fishing right now. More people muskie fishing than ever before, more people catching more muskies than ever before. It's called the fish of 1,000 casts, 10,000 casts. It is not an easy fish to catch, but the learning curve has been drastically cut down. Online information available, and there's more people catching more fish. And the reason that it's a better fishery is because muskie fishermen started preaching catch and release in the late 60s and early 70s, the first group to realize that it was important. And in Ottawa, our fish live to 30 years old. We catch the same fish repeatedly through its life. Without catch and release, without good catch and release, the fishery wouldn't sustain itself. All your big fish are females as well, so you need to treat them like gold. It's our Canadian record fish, 65 pounds, 4 ounces, caught in Georgian Bay, 1988. Interesting fact about this fish, well, it was caught on a Rapala, that big, which drives muskie guys nuts because all our lures are that big, and that's what we throw. So it was caught that big, and that fish has one thing in its belly. It's got about 30 mud pouts, about that long. It's not what people consider as normal muskie food, but muskies spend 2/3 of their time on or near the bottom. For all their speed and all their veracity and all their aggressiveness, everything that has those skills needs more time to recuperate, spends more time on the bottom. And in the Ottawa River in our area, they eat more catfish than anything else. There's over 90 species of fish in the Ottawa River. Catfish makes up about 27-28% of the biomass. Muskies hang out on the bottom. It just makes sense. If you live in Ottawa, you have access to, forget what we have right here, within 90 minutes, 120 minutes of us, you have access to the 5 best muskie fisheries in the world. Okay? Going back 20, 30 years, Northern Ontario was it. Lake of the Woods, Eagle Lake, Vermilion Lake, Lac Seul, that was all the promised land of muskie fishing. Move to today, we're a lot smarter than we used to be. The Ottawa River is a top 10 according to the Americans. That's one of our beautiful fish, and Jim Sarek from Muskie Hunter TV. That's Mike Lazarus with a former live release world record, also out of the Ottawa River, Lake of Two Mountains going towards Montreal. Kingston Gananoque, Dr. John Farrell from Queen's University says that's where the next world record is coming from. The largest growth potential and the fastest growing genetics. That's a 59.5-inch fish caught by my friend Dave Curtis and his wife Doris a few years ago, and it's caught in August. That fish was caught in November. It might be a record. And it's a terrible fish. It's a terrible picture if you know, because it's taken on a dock and it's a dead fish. And I tell you, both Doris and Dave cried a lot when that fish died, because that's the worst thing that can ever happen to us in musky fishing as well. But it just is. And then the other two best fisheries in the area, Lake St. Francis from Cornwall to Valleyfield, probably the best musky fishery on the planet right now. Tough water to figure out, but probably the best on the planet. And then Lac St. Louis in downtown Montreal. 5 of the top 10 fisheries in the world within 2 hours of you. And then what do you have in Ottawa? Okay, this is a rare fish everywhere. It's a rare fish in Ottawa. The Ottawa River, the Rideau River, the Gatineau River, the Madawaska River, the Bon Cher River, the Jock River. And then one of the best kept secrets, a lot of the lakes in Western Quebec and in Gatineau were all stocked. We had somebody come up and show us a 52-inch muskie they caught out of their lake that's a kilometer long over in Gatineau. And so there's muskies everywhere around Ottawa. So you have access to it in the city, outside the city, everywhere. They're not rare here. Why is the Ottawa River so good? 1,300 kilometers long, 13 dams, and we keep the water levels. The Ottawa River is managed to keep the water levels exact from year to year, so we feed the St. Lawrence and we keep the seaway flowing. And what that water does, a muskie wants to live the same pattern every single year of its life. It wants to spawn not just in the bay, in the back right corner of the bay, every single year. And then it's going to recuperate near where it spawns, and then it's going to head off to a summer home range where it's going to spend 10 or 12 weeks. It's going to go to the same summer home range every single year of its life. And so they're really cyclical with the dams. We keep the water level stable. The fish can always go to where they want to spawn. They always have a successful year of spawning, unless you have a giant flood, okay, which wiped out 2 years of spawn. But every year we have a successful spawn, successful recruiting, and that's why our fishery has both numbers. Okay, 1 to 2 fish a day is great numbers for a muskie fishery, and we're one of 7 designated world-class muskie fisheries in Canada. We have the genetics to produce a world record out of the Ottawa River. That's a section I do in the States a lot. American muskies, I speak in Pennsylvania and Ohio. About 78 fisheries in those 2 states, almost 0 natural reproduction. 1 14-year-old muskie, handful of 13-year-old muskies, and the biologist there tells me to tell the people that don't fish the fish over 80 degrees in the reservoir, because they all die. Our fish live to 30 years old. Every week I have an American say, that's the strongest fish I've ever had on. And they are. We don't stock in Canada unless it's to rehabilitate a fishery. We only put back the original genetics. Our system, we look after the integrity of the system. We let natural reproduction take care of itself. Our fish are wild and free and the biggest, baddest muskies in the world. That's what we have. Best place to learn muskie behavior and tactics. There is a big learning curve in the muskie world. Muskies Canada, an incredible organization. I've been grinding on Jim for a couple of days, so I'll take this opportunity to do that again. This poster here has 5 pictures of people holding muskies. I've been speaking at these shows for 30 years. Never had 5 people, and only 5 with bass. And the biggest club in Eastern Ontario and Western Quebec is Muskies Canada, with 130 members, I think, as of today. Okay, and it's not an accident. So there's been a changing of the guard. Bass is still very cool in the tournament circuits, but with COVID, we sold 50% more licenses in Ontario. And the two areas of people are rediscovering that fishing is great for families. It's just a wonderful activity for so many reasons. They're coming back to it in groves. The two areas of fishing that's growing the fastest, musky fishing and fly fishing. And if you really want to get crazy, fly fishing for musky, doing something that's hard the hardest way possible. Our Ottawa chapter meets every Monday, or once a month at the Legion. We have great guest speakers. We have a phenomenal online resource and forum where you can go and gather as much learning as you want there. We have the opportunity to go and fish probably 15 different outings. The Ottawa chapter has 5 outings on their own. You can go and fish with more experienced people. You compare notes, and then my favorite thing about the club, sport fishing research. That's what it says on our crest. We drive more research in Ottawa than any place in the world for muskellunge. Out of Carleton University and Cook Labs. 7 minutes from where you're sitting right now, there's 30 muskies with transmitters on them in the Echoland section, from Long Island locks down to Blacks Rapids, and transponders at the locks at both ends and every tributary. And we'll read the behavior of those fish for 9 years. There's 24 more fish in the Jock River with transmitters on them. There's gobies in the Rideau River. If you don't know what a goby is, that should concern you. There's gobies, 50-some gobies with transmitters in the Rideau system. That's going to change everything in the future out there. So this year we're going up to put transmitters and fish on the Petawawa River early on. So the opportunities for learning, if you want to support research, if you want to support the fishery, if you just want to have a pop at the Legion, it's the best thing you can do to fix your learning curve in the musky world. Come join us at the booth after if you've got any questions or you're interested in more. So our fish live to 30 years old, all naturally producing. Want to follow the same pattern every year. Okay, we learned this from our first telemetry study. We started putting transmitters on fish in 1994 out on the Rideau, and or out on the Ottawa River. And one of the things we learned right away is a third of the fish disappeared after they spawned. That the transmitters didn't work. But a third of the fish went out deeper than 15 feet, where the transmitters worked back in the day. And then they became visible again at the end of the season or when they spawn the next year. So we learned that there's fish that live deep all year. There's fish that live shallow all year. And there's fish that wander in between. 3 different lifestyles in those. So lots of different ways to fish for these fish. They're an ambush predator. So my favorite, I fish shallow all the time. I fish shallow right to December, 95% of the time. 10 feet of water or less all the time. Because from a study that we did called Project Noble Beast, groundbreaking study where we measured the stress that we put on fish out on the river, there were always fish in shallow on the good weed structures every day of the year. Spring, summer, fall. Whether you saw them or not, they were there all the time. Okay, and so as a guide, I make a living off of that. I know there's fish in the weeds all the time. There's bigger fish in open water because it's easier to make a living off of eating schools of bait fish, eating your moon eyes, your white suckers. They don't eat walleyes. For walleye guys saying they eat our walleyes, you guys are wrong. The science doesn't show that. The Bemidji State University study from 2 months ago, 104 musky stomachs, 4 walleyes in 104 fish. Walleyes are not a target fish for muskies. Good learning from our project. This fish had a transmitter put in it in 1994. That's what a transmitter looked like back then. It was about that long, had an antenna coming out of the belly. The transmitters we put in fish this past year are that big, and they last for 9 years. This fish was caught, transmitted in 94, she's 47.5 inches. Caught in 2000, on July 4th, she's 50.5 inches. She grew a ½ inch a year for 6 years, and we caught her 100 feet from where she was on July 4th in 1994. So that kind of learning through the research is unbelievable. And you catch the same fish in the same place year after year. Even if you don't see it, it's there. And the reason you don't see it is because you condition it. We have changed musky behavior so incredibly with all the people that are taking up musky fishing these days. In the 90s, we never had follows. Fish didn't chase baits to the boat because they'd never seen them. They just crushed them as soon as they saw them. Now, in my boat, we catch almost 40% of the fish, somewhere around 40% of the fish right there. And so that's why we musky fish. That's why we cast all day, because the craziest moment you can have in freshwater fishing is to bring a 4-foot fish into the boat and turn it in a circle 2, 3, 7, 10 times, and then have it crush your bait with your drag clamp down. That's the most insane 45 seconds, 60 seconds that you can have, period. And musky guys will cast all week to have that once or have that twice. 1 fish a day constitutes success, and so that's the addiction. That's what we're there for. Fastest swimming fish in freshwater, burst speeds over 50 kilometers an hour. Musky's an ambush predator, so they sit and wait in hiding. And the other way that they hunt is they go and they get in behind their bait. Instead of swimming right to something they want, they go and get behind it and they chase it down. There's nothing that they can't catch in the system. And every fish has a blind spot. If you look at your bait fish, their eyes stick way out off their head, so they have less of a blind spot behind them. Muskies fish like that, they're more like Doberman eyes. They're the hunters, and so muskies know that they can chase it down. That's another reason why we have the follows. When you have a follow, you need to engage that fish. You need to be on your game to catch that fish. And for those of you who've evolved through the sport, it sounds like we had a pretty experienced crowd here. Everybody figure eights now. You need to be on your game so much. You need to read the fish and its attitude coming in, and you need to know if you can catch it now, and if you don't, we come back later to catch it. I'll talk about peaks in a second. For all, muskies spend 2/3 of their time on or near the bottom. When they're laying on the bottom, they're negative or neutral. They're uncatchable or they're very difficult to catch. 2/3 of the time there. And then you can add in other things that cause them to go to the bottom more. Blue skies, high pressure. Every fish is laying on the bottom. The barometer's bottomed out. They're all laying on the bottom. Big fish. There's nothing that gets older in life that spends less time laying down. It's just the way that it is. And so your big fish are spending more time. And so it's kind of ironic because we fish so fast and so hard. A lot of musky guys only have one speed. That's old school. It's old school. You got to address the mood of the fish. You need to present to the fish. This is really big in musky fishing because the more experienced your fish gets, and because we're only fishing for 1 fish a day, there are predictable periods of activity and inactivity. Okay? There are peak periods in the day. When I wake up, I look at the weather, so I stay safe, but I look to see if the barometer is going to drop in the day, if the wind is going to change in the day, if there's a storm coming, when is that storm getting there? Because I know my muskies are going to go before the storm gets there. I know they're going to go if the wind changes direction, goes from east to west. And so I try and calculate these things. I look to see when the moon rises, when the moon sets, when the moon's directly overhead, when the moon's directly on the other side of the world. All 4 of those open windows for you. Some days the window's this big and you won't even notice it. Other days the window is everything. That's when you catch your 1 fish or your 2 fish. So how do you use that? You've been fishing for half a day and you have a peak coming up, you have a storm coming in. Take what you learned, go back to the biggest fish that you saw. Go back to where you saw the most fish. Go to where you know the biggest fish lives. The best peak of all is sunset. Okay? From putting transmitters on fish in the Echoland section for years with Dr. Cook, we got over 250,000 data points of movement on 2 schools of muskies, going back about 10 or 12 years. Highest activity time, sunset. Lowest activity time, in the morning. Activity relates to catchability for every fish that's ever been studied. So this is the sleep in late, catch more fish. When I do charters, I try to steer my people, we're going to go out at 1 o'clock. We're going to go fish from 1 till 10. Pre-sunset, sunset, the half an hour to an hour afterwards, that's gold time. I make a living off of that. And now, as there's more and more pressure, fishing into the dark and into peaks on the dark is more and more important because the fish are learning. We're teaching them. They're getting conditioned, they know. We got to get better and better on our game. So the peaks in musky fishing, absolutely key. Reading those, planning for those, having a plan when they get there, all necessary for success. 5 essential pieces of equipment. The musky world has changed and equipment is changing so much year by year. When I started fishing, my musky rod wasn't even 6 feet long. All the musky rods were 6 feet long. Now, I fish with 9 and 10 foot rods. Okay, and there's a couple reasons for that. This is a Shimano Compre. It's an extendable rod. The boat manufacturers haven't caught up to the musky world. This fits in your boat and your truck. The big rod lets me do a number of things. It's a lot of work throwing lures all day. So I want to keep my back straight and I want to let physics do the work. And I don't want to throw with my shoulder or my elbow. I just want to throw with a pendulum, just like that, okay? And physics, I can throw a lure as long as I want, just like that. I'm 62, I am all about the easy way to do things at this point in life. So keep your back safe, physics lets you throw harder, and this is the big one. This is the really big one. We catch those fish at the side of the boat, and you need to turn, it's called a figure 8, but I teach people don't do a figure 8. Figure 8s is for Americans and little muskies, okay? You need to do a big oval or a big circle. And my rod is 3 or 4 feet underwater, and I'm doing the biggest oval that I can. And the reason is, big fish can't turn sharp circles. And you're fishing for the biggest muskies in the world. So if you do a short circle like that with a 50-inch fish in behind, you're forcing it to make a purchase decision on your bait right then and there. Don't do that. Engage the fish, keep it interested, change your speeds, change your depths. Do not force it to turn. Do not turn your bait and go back past it. It's a very unnatural action, and that fish will just swim off. And so I spend the first hour and a half of my day with guests, coaching them meticulously over and over. And I tell you, I'm teaching you to be ready for the 1 follow or the 2 follows you're going to get later in the day, because that's your shot. When that fish is there, and for new people, I mean, as a guide, it's an interesting process teaching people, because the first time the fish shows up, it doesn't matter what you've told them. Did you see that? That was your chance. That's one of the 5 fish that we're going to contact today. Statistically, we contact 5 or 6 fish. We fish for 900 hours, 2 rods, maybe 3 rods chucking. Statistically, we get 5 or 6 contacts. 3 of them are going to be at the side of the boat. So you need to be more on your game for this fish than anything. Bait casting reels. They are so new, they are so good. Jim and I were at the Shimano conference last year. They handed out the new generation of bait casters. And they said, go ahead, throw it against the wall, get a bird's nest. You can't. You can't. The magnetics and the systems inside are so good. Musky reels don't have all of that technology, but more and more of it. They're so friendly now. They're so powerful. This is a Tranx 400 high-speed reel, 39 inches of line on a retrieve, because that speed factor is really big. And there's days in the summer where reeling as fast as you can catches the fish. Literally as fast as you can. Okay, so high speed, low speed, that's the game. The big net, which I left in the booth, if you're gonna go fishing for muskies, you owe it to the muskies to have the right equipment. I have 100-pound test. I have a 175-pound fluorocarbon leader on here. My goal is to release that fish because she's a female. She's gonna live to 30 years old, and she's gonna bring joy to 6 or 8 more people in her life. And because the balance in the river is maintained naturally. And if you start killing or mistreating big fish, you change everything out there. So the equipment, people ask, how long is the fight? When they eat at the side of the boat, it's 30 seconds. It's a minute, and that's it. And that's why we have the right equipment. And that's why we have the big net. The big net is your release, is your live well in musky fishing. The fish stays in the water. We don't put it on the floor of the boat. It's a 30-pound muscle. It's going to concuss. It's going to concuss its head. It's going to injure itself in the boat. We do all the work in the net. And then this, if you only take one thing away, no matter what you fish for today, these are called Nipex cutters. If you haven't had a hook in you, you will, and you'll think back to this moment and you'll go, oh, darn, that guy said Nip, yeah, I should have Nipex. Okay, so in the musky world, when our fish looks hooked badly, we cut hooks. We don't play. A hook costs $1.50, and so we cut the hooks. And then the points come out really easily after you take the pressure off. But no matter what you fish for, just for safety, you need a pair of cutters that cuts whatever it is that you have. So Nipex, don't buy cheap ones, okay? They won't do the job for you. Get a pair of Nipex. It's just a safety feature that you should have in your boat. And again, muskies bite. Their bite depends on their aggression. There's times when they're not aggressive. I see fish come out with their mouth closed and push a bait away because you're bothering them. They know it's bad, they don't want it, but they're not there to bite it, or they'll poke it or pop it. And they do that a lot, especially in the fall. So you get a lot of fish hooked on the outside of the mouth. But when your fish are really aggressive, right before the storm, right after the moon peak, the lure's back here. So what are you gonna do? You went musky fishing. Now you got a 50-inch, 22-year-old fish in the boat with a lure in the back of her throat. It's up to you to get it out. If you don't have the big net, that fish dies. You don't have the cutters, that fish dies. Or this is a good release tool in the modern day for going in deep in the throat and grabbing a hold of a hook and being able to get it out. So you owe it to the muskies to have the right equipment if you're going musky fishing. Thank you. Thanks, Jason. I didn't want you to watch the whole video, but you can watch this anyway. This is a video that Dan Notarianni, he's one of the guys speaking here with Live to Fish. Dan and my guide Lisa went out on Lake Two Mountains last November. And so this segment is on electronics. I'm going to talk about lures and techniques after this. The best thing that you can do to catch more fish is learn your electronics, to have the most current electronics and to learn your electronics. The game has changed. It is night and day. We see a lot of the fish before we catch them. This past year, the professional musky tournament trail in the US, halfway through the season, banned forward-facing live sonar. If I sold forward-facing sonar, that's the best advertisement you can have. You banned it from the musky world because it's too good. And so the game has changed in the States. I got to fish with Larry Ramsell and the owners of two of the big lodges in Minnesota last year. I'll cut for a second. This is fishing off the back of the boat. Lisa's on the other side, and she just brought a fish in, and we're looking at the fish finder. And she brought a big shadow in behind her bait. And so we both look at the screen. If a muskie sits like this and your imaging picks it out, it looks exactly like a muskie. Tail, every fin, the eyes, like this, like this, like this, like this. You need to know what all of those things look like on your screen too. So we just saw a shadow. We're just picking a shadow up behind Lisa on the other side. I know the fish is there. And see where it ate? I got 3 feet of line out. This is our first spot of the day. And this is a musky fight. You can count it down. It's 30, 45 seconds. They don't have the same energy they do in November that they did. So the Americans now, they're going out and not casting until they see fish. This is totally bizarre to me. A musky day with the guides in a lot of the American lakes are 40 casts. They drive open water, they spot a fish, they throw 2 casts at it. If it reacts, they'll engage it some more. If it doesn't react, they leave. It makes no sense at all, but it is the new reality. It's reading the fish and using the using electronics. So Lisa bringing a fish in, catching it on the other side, and as a guide, I sit and look at the screen. In another life, I worked for IBM, and I quit because I hate looking at computer screens. And now all these years later, as a guide, I sit and I stare at the computer screen, and I tell my guests, you got to fish in behind your bait. You got to fish down deep. And we had, last year we coined a phrase called virtual follows. We had fish that were seeing on the finder and doing circles and looking in the water, and there's nothing there. There, flashed on you again, flashed on you again. And you're not seeing the fish. Only with the electronics do you see the fish in the dirtier water or down deep. And so the best thing you can do, absolute best thing you can do, better than any equipment, is to learn your electronics. Get the latest and greatest, get the side imaging. Costs a lot of money, but it's how you play the game these days, and you need it. You need it, because the fish are getting more conditioned, smarter, because we're making them that day, so you need the new tools. So you see this fish. Again, the fish hasn't come out of the net. Sat in the net. We did all our work in the net. This is the first time it's going to come out of the water. First fish of the day. Didn't measure it. It's like 60, 65 inches long or something. It's like 4 feet long. Somewhere in there. Nice fat November fish. The water's cold. I wouldn't usually hold a fish out of the water this long, especially in the summer when your water temperature. A lot of guys don't chase muskies when the water's over 80 degrees. Your dissolved oxygen levels decrease like this, and a fish's ability to create stress goes up like this. So the hardcore muskie guys, we just take fish off in the water if it's really hot. Just release them. Don't need a picture. It's not about that. It's looking after the fish. I don't push the fish front and back. I might move it a little sideways. And I just hold the fish upright very lightly. And as soon as she tells me she's ready to go on her own, she goes. That's it. Whole program. 30 seconds out of the water. And we'll catch that fish again. That fish has another, at a ½ inch growth rate a year. Her maximum growth potential is 56 inches, 55.9 inches on the Ottawa River. She's got another 10 years. Yeah, cradle's old school. It's easy to get the hooks caught in a cradle as well. And the other thing that I hate about it is your buddy's got a fish on, and you put your face down at the side of the boat, and then you put the 2 pegs of the cradle out like this, and then you tell your buddy to bring the fish right up towards your face with a big lure stuck in his face, and the fish coming at you can only go one way. So it's much older school technology. This is it. This is absolutely it. You need a bag that's big and deep, so that is your live well. And this is a folding net. Okay, so if you have a smaller boat, this folds right over and right down. Okay, so even if you have a tinny, if you're going musky fishing, you owe it to the fish. You owe it to the fish to have that. In the musky world, talk a little bit about lures. This style of bait was created by a housewife in Wisconsin about 25 years ago, and it revolutionized the musky world. She took 2 blades and she wove them together on clevises, and that simple modification right there creates vibration that the fish have never seen. It makes this bait give off a vibration that makes it much bigger than it is to a fish that's reading, and this catches more than 50% of the muskies in the musky world. Has ever since it was created. Muskies are sight predators first and foremost, okay? But they have a lateral line down the side of their body that is so good, it allows them to hit to find prey in the dark and in dirty water and hit moving prey in the head. 19 out of 20 times when this was studied in Minnesota on a blind pond. So that's not using their eyes, that's in the dark. They are that good. So that vibration is a really big factor. For colors in the musky world, one of the basic rules for color is you can use any color you want as long as it's black. That's a great rule. Black and orange, as good as it gets. Black and silver, black and chartreuse. All fantastic stuff. Another rule that's good to follow is bright day, bright color, dark day, dark color. And so on a bright sunshine day, this is called Orange Prior Sunrise. This is a musky factory bait. I make these ourselves. This is what we'll throw. This or this in the bright sunshine, because what we want is a disco ball. We don't want a fish to get a good view of what they're looking at. That's why black works. If you picture a fish underneath a bait in low light conditions, it's a black profile, it's moving fast, but you don't get a good look at it. If you picture it being underneath this on a sunny day, it's just a lot of glow, it's moving fast, it's giving off vibration. The fish doesn't get a really good read of what it is. And so bright day, your absolute brightest colors. Something that it takes people a while to figure out. Other big innovation in the musky world, baits with tails. Musky people, we're the last innovators of new technology. We watch everybody else invent curly tails, twister tails, and then about 10 or 15 years after they come around, somebody in the musky world says, we should have those, you know? And then we start. So this came out in the 90s, and the neat thing, this is Susie Sucker. This is a suic bait. And the neat thing about these is they don't come with any instructions, and everybody fishes them different. On Lake St. Clair, they throw these out, and they rip them, let them sink, rip them, and they work them as hard as they can out in the deep water, and they catch lots of fish. For me, this is that day when the fish are all laying on the bottom, when they don't want to chase. When I haven't seen a fish throwing blades or jerk baits or top water for 3 or 4 hours, I need to do something different. So my fish are laying down, and we'll throw this out and do what's called a Jersey retrieve in my boat. Guys from New Jersey have 8 lakes with muskies. They know every muskie knows them, super pressure. This is what they do, and they throw this out, they lean back, and they reel it in like this. Real easy muskie fishing, and all you're doing is swimming this over the bottom where the fish are, off the weed bed edges, out in deeper water, anywhere that you see them, but you're just letting that tail do the work. And when they're laying on the bottom and they're negative, they won't chase anything. When they're neutral, they might chase a bait 3 or 4 or 5 feet. And so what you're doing is putting the bait in the strike zone, and this tail just looks real. All these years later, they still can't figure out that that tail's not real. So there's 2 baits that you absolutely have to have. I talk about how much hard work musky fishing is, but there's some baits that you can use if you're not that hard work person. We have lots of kids and lots of older people that go fishing. This is a jerk bait. This was invented in the 50s by Frank Suick. Hasn't changed at all. All it does is catch fish. The fish in the video caught on one of these. It's the same bait it was when I was buying them in the 70s. Okay? And this was created, Frank owned trout ponds. And when one of his trout got sick, I would dive down, and float back up and try and dive down and float back up. And that was a signal for big fish in the tank to come and eat it. And that signal in nature works for trout or works for anybody. So this jerk bait here, this piece of wood, this is gold. This and the rubber tail. I use the blades all year. As we get into the cold, we're switching to the rubber and to the jerk baits only. And a topwater bait is probably, Gord Pizer says this is only the best bait about 15% of the time. But when it's the best bait, it really is the best bait. And what I like about these is they catch a higher percentage of giant fish than your other baits do. So it's not the right bait all the time, but the biggest fish you'll catch, often on the top waters. And again, really, really easy to fish. Musky information, I'll leave you with this. You can go to Ottawa River muskyfactory.com, muskyfactorybaits.com. We're on Facebook. Have a YouTube channel with the Musky Monday seminar series, 20 episodes done with Dr. Sean Landsman, Jim Zarek, Pete Mena, all the TV guys, all the Musky guys, 90-minute learning sessions on techniques, on the science of muskies, and on behavior. Muskies Canada is the best place that you can learn. Come on over there and ask some questions after. I got time for 1 or 2 questions now if anybody wants. Medusas? Really popular last year. Bulldogs have been around for so long. Medusa's a different look. Absolutely love Medusas. And I had one in my bucket to bring today. I just didn't pack it in this morning, but yeah, absolutely. Again, it's a rubber-tailed bait, 3 tails on it, and a different look. So being different in the musky world, really good idea. They're getting conditioned. They live for 30 years. They do have a memory, and so being different.
You got to chase. How long do you keep your water or lower the water to try?
Okay, so when you have a fish that follows, 1, you're not looking at your bait coming in, you're looking behind it and below it to try to spot that fish as soon as possible. 2, we're looking for it on the electronics so that we know that it's there. I'm going to engage it as long as I can see it, and then I'm going to get my guests to go for another 30, 45 seconds anyway. And I'm going to keep watching on the fish finder. Just because you don't see that fish doesn't mean that it didn't just duck under your boat and it's sitting and looking, or didn't mean that it went out 10 feet and turned around and is sitting just out there still watching what's going on. So when you have that fish in a follow mode, it is engaged, it is in hunt mode. Take advantage of that. Do everything you can to catch that fish. And we've caught fish 2 minutes after we stopped seeing them. You know, if we still just get a flash on the electronics, you know it's still around, you stay on it. The other thing we do is when one person gets a follow in the boat, we have everybody put their baits in figure 8 too. And we have the person in the back corner bring a big fish in, and the person in the front corner will get it. Or in the video, Lisa brought a fish in on one side, I got it on the other side. So fish as a team. You can sort out the glory after. If you steal your buddy's fish, totally okay. Buy him a pop later. Buy her a pop later. It'll all be good. And that's one of the neat things in Musky World too, is more and more, you know, in the old days it was all guys. Lisa Goodyear, my head guide at the Musky Factory, she was out over 100 times last year. I can't tell you how many women, how many kids, how many mothers and daughters we have coming to this sport, and how cool it is. So it's the new era.
They say like when you have it out of the water, they say when you have the musky out of the water,
Yeah.
hold your breath. Once you're out of breath, the fish is out of water.
That's a really good idea. So how long should you have it out of the water? Take a deep breath when you pick your fish up. You taught your friend, you taught your partner has the camera ready to go. They know how to use your phone. They're all set up. Then take your breath, take the fish out. When you can't breathe, when you're out of breath, time for the fish to go back in the water, especially in July and August. That's a good rule. Good point. Thanks. Last one.
If you got your fish from the boat, would it make any sense for your partner to throw out and come back in?
If you have a fish around the boat, it makes sense for them to keep fishing, but if you just had a fish at the boat, I'd rather have them working the fish right at the boat. That fish probably didn't come in and take off fast. It's somewhere close by. Fish it as a team. Thanks very much, everybody. Hope to see you over at the Muskies Canada booth. Hope to see you out on the water. Enjoy the show.